Okay, so we're now going to look at how we can manipulate objects that are in the 3D viewport. So the first way we want to manipulate an object is by moving it. So click on the cube, and then you can use the G key to activate the movement tool. Okay, so try that. And now what we can do is limit it to move on a particular axis. So the global transformation is currently the one that's set. So when I move this, it's going to move along the global axes that we can see these lines for. So if I press GX, it's now going to move along the x-axis, the global x-axis. If I press GY, it's going to be sort of limited to only move along the global y-axis. GZ is going to move up and down on the z-axis. For rotation, we press the R key, and now we can rotate. And if you don't specify an axis, it's going to rotate based on the view. So wherever you're looking, the viewing angle is going to be the rotation axis. And then we can rotate on a particular axis, just like we could with the move tool. So R and then Y is going to rotate around the global y-axis. RX is going to be the global x-axis, and RZ is going to be the global z-axis. So let's try moving this a little bit, and then we'll rotate it like so. Now what happens if you want to move this in this way? So it's moving along its own axis. We've rotated it now, so it's no longer sort of aligned with the world anymore. And this is why each object has got its own local coordinate system as well, which we can select up here. So if I change this now to local and then do GZ, it's going to move along its own local z-axis. And the same goes for rotation as well. So RX going to move on its own x-axis, RY on its own y-axis. And this is obviously very handy when you're manipulating objects and you want to make sure they move along a particular trajectory. For example, you might have a gun that isn't aligned with the world coordinate system perfectly, and you've got a bullet in the chamber. You're going to want that bullet to travel along its own local coordinate system rather than the world coordinate system. So that's a good use, that's a good example of where that would come in handy. We've also got scale. So with the box still selected, you can press the S key, and we can now scale up and down. And if you want to change the transform orientation back to global, you can do that over here. Or a shortcut, you can press the comma key on the keyboard and then choose the orientation in here. And another much quicker way, which has actually just been pointed out to me by one of the viewers on YouTube, Fortissimo X. One method that I forgot to include in this section of the course is that you can actually change the coordinate system, the transform orientation, much quicker than using the list here or by using the dot key on the keyboard. What you can actually do is if you choose to move it on a particular axis, I've got it set to global currently. So if I move this G and press Z, you can see it's moving on the global. Now, if I press Z again, just look at the top left-hand corner over here. You can see it says global Z. So I'll press Z again, and now it says local. I press it again, and we're back to just a free, and then back to global. So that's a very quick way of doing it, and it works with X, Y, and Z. Now, with rotation, we always need to rotate around something. So by default, it's going to rotate around the median point of the object. So we can change that here with the pivot point. So let's say, for example, I want to rotate around this little cursor, this little sort of, looks like a hula hoop that's sat in the middle of the screen. I can change the pivot point to be the 3D cursor. So that's what this little thing is called down here. And now when I rotate, it's going to rotate around that point. But we can actually move this point by shift right-clicking anywhere on the screen, and then it's going to rotate around that point there. But we've got other options we can choose. So we've got the individual origins. That's going to be the little origin point here. This is a little yellow dot in the middle of the cube that we spoke about earlier. And then we've got a few options as well, such as active element, which basically means if you've got multiple things selected, the last one you selected is the active element. So the other objects would rotate around that. And again, with a scale, we can also do that on a particular axis as well. So X, Y, and Z. And just to make it a bit easier, I'm going to change this to the local transform again. So I'm going to press the comma key on the keyboard, choose local, and now when I do S and Z, it's going to scale on the local Z instead of the global. All right, so have a quick play about with those options until you're really comfortable with that. And then we'll look at how we can do it in edit mode. So when we actually edit the geometry.